Hi everyone, hope you're all doing okay and having a nice day. Really missing all of you lots, but hoping we'll be able to see each other again soon. So today I'm going to talk us through an example or model of the story that you're writing. So hopefully you can get some good ideas from this. So I'll just start by reading the example to you. This is also on the website if you can't see the screen. So, the young boy crouched with his head in his hands, seemingly unaware of the destruction that surrounded him. Covered with dust, he slowly rose up to face the chaos that he had caused, unable to comprehend his apparent powers. Whilst he surveyed his surroundings, he fell backwards onto his hands. Had he really created this? Just moments before, the boy had thought his life was simple, but things had just become more than a little complicated. As he looked around, he could see papers concealing the cracks in the floor and the heavy metal lockers lying like broken soldiers in battle. A sponge ball, teacher's folders, empty food wrappers, all this lay around in what seemed to be a scene of demolition. The walls were no longer immaculately displaying timetables and pupil awards. Now they only displayed the mighty powers that lay within. With one swift movement, the boy got to his feet, letting out a sigh of disbelief as he did so. Slowly, he began to walk down the corridor, allowing himself no time to stand and stare. So hopefully you'd agree that this is a good model. I think it's good because it's tense, it's interesting, and it got me hooked as the reader. So we're going to look today at how the author achieves this. So I think one way the author achieves this is by their use of vocabulary. So the words that they're using. And I don't think that the longest words are always the best words to use in your writing. Sometimes you think, oh, there's a word and it's got 10 letters, I'm going to pop that in. Could be appropriate, but you need to make sure that actually it fits within the meaning of the sentence and it adds to the meaning. I'm quite guilty of getting a thesaurus, looking up a word, seeing a really formal one or a posh one that I've never heard of before, and I think, oh, I'm going to pop that in. I know it's a synonym, so it means the same thing. You've got to be really careful because although they are synonyms and they have a similar meaning, every word has a slightly different meaning. So look it up if you need to, but don't just pop one in that you've never heard of. Double check that it fits. So in this model, one word that I particularly like is here in the first paragraph, destruction. And I really like this word because it's not just saying there's a mess or there's some damage, this total destruction, which is meaning there's damage beyond repair. The whole place has been destroyed. So it creates that image in the reader's head so they can sort of see the scene for themselves and imagine it. What I'd like you to do now is to put me on pause and pick out 4 or 5 words or phrases, because there are some really good phrases in this model, that you think are good. It could be that they're interesting, or it could be that you think that they create an atmosphere, and make a note of them in your book or on a piece of paper, and then when you're done, unpause me and I'll be back to start again. Okay, welcome back. So some words I really like, you might not have picked these out because there are lots of good ones, but I really like the phrase actually here, more than a little complicated. I like this because before it says the boy had thought his life was simple. So we've got simple and then we've got more than a little complicated. So antonyms of one another, and it really shows that contrast. And it's not just complicated, it's more than a little complicated. So you know that it's a really tricky situation. Another phrase that I really like is this one here. It's a simile. So metal lockers lying like broken soldiers in battle. Similes are quite tricky to do, and what's good about this one is that it adds to that atmosphere and it sets the scene nicely. The author could have written lying like a little puppy having a snooze. Now we wouldn't use that because we don't want to create that calm, lovely atmosphere. So that's one reason I really like that simile. I also like the word immaculately. So immaculately means it's perfectly tidy and it's really neat. So the displays are immaculate. And obviously now everything's been destroyed. So again, there's that contrast and you can see the change that has happened. Another thing, moving on from vocabulary, that I think makes this model good is the openers. So the sentence starters. I think the variation makes it more interesting to the reader. If we removed those interesting openers, the writing suddenly becomes a little bit boring. So I'll read it to you now without those interesting openers, and you can just hear it for yourself. So, the young boy crouched with his head in his hands. He was unaware of the destruction that surrounded him. He was covered with dust. He slowly rose up to face the chaos that he had caused. He was unable to comprehend his apparent powers. He surveyed his surroundings. He fell backwards onto his hand. Blah, 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 blah. So hopefully you can see it's just a little bit more boring to listen to. So put me on pause again. Maybe pick out 2 or 3 of the openers that you like that you could magpie in your writing today. And then when you've written them down, unpause me. Okay, some openers I really like in the first paragraph, covered with dust. I really like at the end, with one swift movement. These add more detail, add more description, so they're really effective to use. And the final thing that I would like to talk about in this model is the variation in sentence structure and punctuation. There's quite a lot of different punctuation in here. Have a look, see if you can count, not including full stops and capital letters, see if you can count 4 different pieces of punctuation. I'll pause for now. So I can see, you might have said commas, I can see a question mark, semicolon, colon, and a dash. Now I know you heard from Miss Wilcox about semicolons and colons, so I'm not going to focus too much on those. I'd like to start by having a look at this sentence here involving a dash. So it reads, a sponge ball, teacher's folders, empty food wrappers. All this lay around in what seemed to be a scene of demolition. This is a sentence structure we've looked at once before. It's called, well, we call it the 3 bad dash because that's what Alan P in his book of sentence structures calls it. So you have a list of 3 things. So it could be 3 nouns or 3 feelings, and they're separated by commas. So here we've got a sponge ball, comma, teacher's folders, comma, empty food wrappers. And once you've written the 3rd item, you put your dash, and after the dash will be a main clause that links or explains the first 3 items that you've listed. So a sponge ball, teacher's folders, empty food wrappers, all this lay around in what seemed to be a scene of demolition. So it's explaining those items and the fact that they are lying around. And this is effective because it adds a lot of detail. And again, it's just varying the sentence structure, makes it sound more interesting and keeps the reader engaged. You could have had feelings, for example, scared, overwhelmed, confused. The boy was going through a whole whirlwind of emotions. So I wrote that, I've written that one. Scared, comma, overwhelmed, comma, confused, dash, the boy was going through a whole whirlwind of emotions. So you can use it with different things. Spoken quite a lot now about vocabulary and varying your openers as well as a different sentence structure using a dash. So if you think, oh goodness, that's a lot to take in, I'm done and I'm ready to start, then you've got today, Wednesday, and tomorrow, Thursday, to write up your story. So if you want to now, you can leave me now. Enjoy your writing. Goodbye. And if you would like to continue, I've got one little challenge. In fact, it's a little challenge. This is a very hard challenge. That you might want to listen to and have a go at. Now, this is to do with the sentence in the first paragraph here. It says, whilst he surveyed his surroundings, he fell backwards onto his hands. Had he really created this? So you should have learned and recapped the other day with Miss Wilcox that for a semicolon, you need 2 main clauses and they need to be linked. So here we have a main clause. He fell backwards onto his hands. It makes sense on its own. Semicolon, had he really created this? It makes sense on its own. Not necessarily linked just yet, but this part links it in blue. So we've got a main clause in yellow and we've got a question after the semicolon. Both make sense on their own. And then we've got this part in blue. Now, I'd like you to have a little think. Do you know what we call this part in blue? I'll give you a few seconds. Okay, it's called a subordinate clause. So we've got our subordinating conjunction, which is whilst, and the whole thing has a subordinate clause. It doesn't make sense on its own. Whilst he surveyed his surroundings, yeah, what happened then? Okay, so you cannot have it as its own sentence. The whole thing together before the semicolon makes sense on its own though. Whilst he surveyed his surroundings, he fell backwards onto his hands, semicolon, had he really created this? You don't need a question at the end. You could have replaced it with a statement. For example, whilst he surveyed his surroundings, he fell backwards onto his hands. He couldn't believe that he had created this mess. So it doesn't have to be a question, but a question is quite nice. So if you'd like to challenge yourself today, have a go at that really tricky sentence structure. Subordinate clause, comma, because when we start with the subordinate clause, we always need a comma after it. Then you've got your main clause, your semicolon, followed by a question or another main clause statement. Again, really effective because it adds lots of detail and description, and it just varies it so the reader's engaged. Good luck with your writing today and tomorrow. Please do send in your final draft for us to have a read. We'd love to see it, and take care. Bye.